Hello everyone and welcome to .NET Core Central. In today's video, I am going to continue my discussion on S3. In last video, I created a bucket and then programmatically using an AWS Lambda, I added this file, this text file into this bucket. And then today I just created another bucket manually, and this bucket right now is empty. So today what we are going to do is using a C# code, we are going to, instead of just creating the file, this time we are going to access the file. So we are going to read the data from the bucket, and we are also going to create a bucket programmatically. Now for doing that, this time instead of creating a AWS Lambda, I'm going to use a C# console. And this way I'm going to show you how you can use a console application or ASP.NET Web API or any other C# code for that matter to connect to an AWS service. Now here in this example, I'm going to show connecting to S3, but you can use the same way to connect to any other AWS services. Now fundamental is very simple. You create a new AWS user using IAM, and when you create a new user, you give the user programmatic access, and when you give the programmatic access, you can assign whatever AWS service you want to use, and you will get an access key ID and a secret access key, and using the access key and the secret, you can access AWS from your local desktop or anywhere else for that matter. Now this is not a good practice because you are exposed with the ID and secret. The best practice is to use just IAM role, but for that you have to be running in the AWS. This is only for development purpose from your local desktop if you want to use the AWS service, or if you are working with multi-cloud scenario and you directly want to access an AWS service from another cloud like Azure, you will use this feature. Now, having said that, let's add the NuGet package necessary for AWS S3. So we are going to install the AWS SDK S3, which also internally uses the AWS Core SDK. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. Once installed, I can go into program.cs, and here we can create an S3 client. So I'll say var S3 client is equal to new Amazon S3 client, and I'm going to add the namespace amazon.s3. And for the constructor of S3 client, as you can see, so far we have been using the default constructor because we run in AWS, the Lambda. The previous example were with Lambda, and in Lambda, the Lambda has a permission which automatically has access to S3 and other services. It's because that's how I created the permission. Now here, apart from that, as you can see, you can use AWS credentials, or you can just pass the key and access, and along with a region endpoint. But in this case, because I'm going to run it from my local PC, I'm going to pass the AWS key and the secret here, and I'm going to use this overload. And I have already saved the key and secret in a constant file. So I'm going to use constant.uid and constant.secret. When you create the role with IAM, the secret and key will be shared. You just have to copy paste that. And again, as I mentioned, we should not be using this unless we are testing it from local PC. So this will create the AWS client, and then what we can do is we can say buckets equal to S3 client dot list bucket async, and here I'm going to use await, and I will use async task, and R is the threading namespace for that. And then finally I can do console dot write line string dot join, and in the join I am going to pass comma separator, and then for the array I'm going to put buckets dot buckets, which is a list of buckets, dot select. I have to add the link namespace here, and then I can say dot bucket name, which is a string, and that's all I have to do. Now if I run this application, I should see the two buckets which are available in S3 in the response. And as you can see test another bucket .NET Core Central and test bucket .NET Core Central. These are the two buckets which I have here in the S3. Now that we could list the bucket name, the next thing we can do is to list the content of the bucket. So for that, what we can do is we get the bucket, and then for each bucket in buckets, and then now we got the buckets, then what we can do is we can do s3 client dot list object async, and the list object async, out of all the parameter, one of the parameter, it takes the bucket name. So we can say bucket dot, here I have to say buckets, so I have to say bucket dot bucket name, and then var objects equal to await this, and then I got all the objects. So what I can do is, again here I can just write all the object name, and then I can say if objects is not equal to null, then just do console dot write line and do string dot join, and this is per bucket. I just have one bucket with one file, so we'll just see one printout happening, but I can do objects dot s3 objects, which is again a list, dot select dot key, which is the, okay, I'm missing the delimiter here, should have been before, yeah, and key is the key of the file or the file name. And if you remember from my last video, the key is nothing but, if I go inside this identifier .txt, the whole thing is the key. So now if I run this application, I should see just one file showing up, and as expected I just see this file which is part of this bucket. Now I can go ahead and print out the bucket name also. So I can say here something like for bucket dot bucket name files, and I can do this. So if I do that, now it is going to print out the bucket name along with the file name. So we can see that for the test another bucket, there is no files. For test bucket, there is one file. So that's the how to list the content of the bucket. And now the other thing we can do is, I'm not going to show the create object because that we have done already through the Lambda. Next thing what we can do is we can create a new bucket. So how do we create a new bucket? So I'm going to comment out this code because we don't need this. So here I can go and I can say s3 client dot put bucket async, and if you see that in the definition, this creates a new s3 bucket. So I'm going to create the bucket, and in the request I can take a put bucket request object. So I'll do new put bucket request, and I have to add the namespace amazon.s3.model, and for the bucket request I'm going to pass the bucket name, and the bucket name is going to be test bucket from code.NET Core Central, and then I can say var response is equal to await of this, and then finally console dot write line of response dot HTTP status code. So let's run this application now, and once I run I see that it's 200. Okay, and now if I go back to AWS S3, refresh this, I can see the test bucket from core.NET Core Central is showing up here. So that's the other thing I wanted to share. Now finally, let's see how we can delete a bucket. And for delete bucket is the same thing. Instead of put bucket async, we can use delete bucket async, and instead of put bucket request, it will be delete bucket request, and everything else is going to remain the same. And now if I just go ahead and run this application, I'm going to go no content, and then if I come here and refresh, I see that the bucket has been deleted from the S3. The last thing I wanted to show is how we can read a file from the S3 bucket. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to again comment this section also out, and let's go to the top. And what we can do is I'll just copy this section back, paste it here. So we were getting the file name here, but instead of getting the file name, what I'm going to do is here I can keep this, but what I can do is for each S3 object in objects.s3 objects. So I'm going to loop through this, and then inside of that, what I can do is I can do s3 client dot get object async, and get object async requires a get object request. So I'm going to create a new get object request, and for the get object request, I'm going to pass the bucket name, and the bucket name is going to be bucket dot bucket name, and the next thing I'm going to pass is the key, and for key I'm going to use the s3 object dot key. So this is all I have to pass, and then here I'm going to say var object response is equal to await of the function, and then what I can do is I can, for the object response here, if you look into the method, apart from key and stuff like that, we get a response stream which returns a stream, or we can use the write response stream to a file async, where we can just give a file path and it's going to write into the file. But what we are going to do is we are going to use the response stream, write it as a string, and print it out in console. So for that, what we can do is we can declare a byte array, and the byte array length is going to be object response dot response stream dot length, and then we can say object response dot response stream dot read, and this will read the sequence from the current stream into the buffer, and for the buffer I'm going to give the bytes, and then offset is 0, and length is bytes dot length. And once this has been read, what we can do is we can say console dot write line, and here we can use encoding, which is part of system.text dot utf8 dot get string, and we can pass the byte array here. Now if we run this application, you can see for bucket test another bucket.NET Core Central there is no file. For the bucket test.NET Core Central there is one file, and then it wrote the content of the file hello from lambda with no name. This is the content of the file if you remember from the last video. Also we can just go ahead and download this file, and we can show that it is the exact same content. You can see that hello from lambda with no name. This is the exact same response we see here as an output. So that is all I wanted to cover today. As a part of this video, we saw how we can list the bucket, from bucket list the object, from object get the file and then write it out as a string, or we can directly write it into a file system. And then we also saw how we can create and delete a bucket programmatically, and all doing from a console application from the local PC. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you are new to my channel, if you think you are getting value out of my channel, please subscribe to my channel. And thanks so much for watching this video.